Hi, and welcome to this next Tarot Masterclass. And we're now on the next card. If you think back to last month, we were exploring basically alchemical transformation, the idea that we can combine all of our experiences to that particular point and embrace a transformation in ourselves. And if you look back to that card, the adjustment in the Thoth deck, you'll realize that that's what that card was all about. How to make those adjustments, how to embrace the inner and outer balance, the conscious and unconscious mind, and well, the alchemical change. The next card in our sequence is an interesting card because it kind of warns what might happen when you're presented with the possibility of that alchemical awakening. So please welcome the devil. And this is quite an interesting card in the sense that we have a concept of what we mean by the devil, which comes from our Judeo Christian backgrounds, and in particular, our Christian backgrounds with the New Testament and the Pauline Gospels or the Pauline work on how the gospel should be interpreted. And of course, the sort of medieval church really codified this idea of what the devil was. In the older texts, the original sort of Old Testament, the devil was never the Antichrist. It was the tester, if you like. It was the person that would test your faith, as in the story of Job, when God sent Lucifer, the angel, down to test Job's faith. I did some pretty yucky things to poor old Job in order to prove his worth. We've come from a card of alchemical transformation into this card that we know is known as a devil. So let's have a look at that. So hi and welcome. Let's look at the devil. Now, here are the two images from the two different tarot decks. On the left, you see the Waite Pamela Colman Smith image, the Waite Pamela Colman Smith image. And on the right, you see the Crowley Frida Harris image. Looking at the image on the left, we see a almost traditional version of the devil. There he is. In fact, that's not the devil. That image of the devil as the goat-footed god actually doesn't belong from the Bible. I don't think you'll find it anywhere in the Bible. You find it in later writings. And certainly in the 18th century, this resurgence of the idea of a character called Baphomet. You may like to look up those things, the natural history of the devil in Christian theology and in other theologies is really worth exploring. So on the left, we have the Waite Pamela Colman Smith devil. And on the right, we have the Crowley Lady Frida Harris devil. Completely different, you may think. There are certain things going on in both images that are common. The goat, for example, is common, but some of the deeper imagery and the more stark imagery we're going to go into right now. So with this particular version of the devil, we actually see a cloven hooved, perhaps, or eagle hooved Pan kind of character sitting on a plinth, raising his hand. And there's something quite similar here, isn't it? You will have seen that gesture of as above, so below with the magician. And is this then a parody of the magician? Is this a dark side of the magician? Possibly not, but maybe we can talk about that in a moment. The first thing you will notice, possibly in terms of symbolism, is the inverted pentagram, which is in between the two horns of this devil. The inverted pentagram with the point down actually is a symbol of material over spirit. When the pentagram's turned the other way up with the point upwards, that's spirit over matter. With the spirit pointing upwards, The other four prongs are basically earth, air, fire, and water. When it's pointing down here, you have earth, air, fire, and water, material nature over spirit, which I think is really interesting to bear in mind. This is not evil, unless you read the Dennis Wheatley novels. It's not a sign of evil, it's a sign of a different view of the way the world works. Interestingly, the Church of Satan, which is not a believer in the Satan and a supernatural nature, is a belief in materialism and basically from atheism. But they've used that symbol to emphasize the material world over any need to consider the spiritual world. But here we have a card that is about material nature. We have a horned god, could be Baphomet or could be the goat of Mendes if you read your Dennis Wheatley. That's worth looking up. We have two human figures to the left and the right. We have a male figure and a female figure, and they appear to be chained to the devil's plinth. Well, they're chained because they're tied to materialism. They are of material nature. However, the chain around their necks is really loose. In fact, the chain could be taken off their necks very easily should they choose. Should they choose to unshackle themselves from material concerns, they can embrace the alchemical transformation from the previous card. Notice the devil's hand his left hand is holding the fire downwards, which again is controlling the fire, not allowing that spark to rise upwards. And the lady has got her hand over what appears to be a bunch of grapes. Notice the tail from the man is actually also a flame. This is about the inner fire and the inner fertility that's being repressed by the devil. I hope this is making sense. The hooked wings are certainly not angel wings, more reminiscent of a bat. What we know about bats is they fly at night. So maybe again, this is a card about the darker side of the soul's journey, maybe the darker side, the nighttime side of ourselves, the shadow side of ourselves. And it's kind of interesting that we can look at this card and see that it represents the resistance we find within ourselves to embrace new, the resistance we find within ourselves to embrace spiritual matters. That's this card. So what do I expect you to do with it? Like in all the other cards, you start with your initial reactions. Are you one of these people that thinks, oh, the devil, nasty, as you might think of the death card? Oh, death, gives you a shudder. What is your initial reaction, and explore where that comes from? Then move on to the symbolic references, the ones that you can find. Is that Adam and Eve? Is that Adam and Eve being tempted or Adam and Eve being repressed? Is it male and female, yin and yang, being repressed? Interestingly, you might look like the female character particularly has horns. Could they be horns, or is that a crescent moon? You have to think about that one. You have to try and understand the mystical references. I would recommend you doing some research on the devil, as it appears in Christian theology, but the devil as it appears in myth, and make a decision for yourself whether you want to think about the devil as a Lucifer kind of character that is the tester of human nature, or whether it's about the limitations. Quite interestingly, and I'll leave you to think about this one, this can be seen as a card of addiction. And the question is, addiction to what and through what? And then what's the devil's function? Holding you back, restraining you, squashing your natural abilities and your inclination to want to soar and develop. So that's the Waite Pamela Colman Smith devil. What about the Lady Frida Harris and Crowley? devil. Now, this is a bit of a different image. The first thing I want you to have a think about is the weird expression on the goat's face. Whenever I'm looking at this, I'm drawn by the fact that the goat has a rather weird smile. But there is also what may be a third eye in that devil. And if you have a look at that, maybe that's about awakening, the awakening inspired by the previous card. That is the alchemical card. The background to this is what maybe, or what I've heard some say, are the canals on Mars. Well, that doesn't kind of work for me, but maybe it worked for you. I see that as a neural net. I see that as the way our brains are wired by our experiences, and therefore our brains can be the limiting factor to taking on board new truths and new ideas. So have a think about that. We have the Caduceus, or a version of the Caduceus, the symbol of life, which is that kind of lectern in front of the goat. Is the lectern, is the goat preaching about life, or is it just there to remind us that within this stasis, within this moment of being held back and being repressed, there is also potential for life? I think the biggest image on this, the most powerful image on this, is the fact that that's a big phallus, isn't it? The sexual imagery there is immediate. We have a phallus plunging into this ring at the top and out of the brain, perhaps into this sort of spiritual awareness, this higher level. And the phallus is there, and also the testes are there. And notice that the testes are actually full of people pushing to break out. Again, the sexual imagery there is quite obvious, isn't it? And also the biological imagery there, that to be fertilized, those little people have got to be let out and move away from their containment. It's really the same as the chains on the previous version of the tarot. Notice also that we see within the testes what are the, well, that's genetics, isn't it? It's the kind of the DNA and the formation of the cell. A bit of biology going on there if you look at it carefully. So that there is life in suspension, waiting to erupt forth to bring new seeds of new development, new growth. So the devil is a restraining, holding back fertility and growth in this particular card. It's being held back by the constraining frameworks that our brain and our limited mind has placed on our version of life. Again, worth thinking about that in terms of limitation and holding back and resisting that spiritual awakening, that the next level of awakening. So we have this sort of unfertilized potential. We have the DNA, we have the phallus, and we have the promise of entrance into other realms. Now, if you look at the goat's horns, somebody said to me once that they're spiral because that's a spiral of DNA. Well, maybe not. They're just spiral because life is this kind of continuing spiral. But right in the middle of the horns, we see some fruits. And those are the fruits, the potential seeds of fertility again. Notice they were grapes in the other image, in the weight image. Now these are between the horns of the devil. There is that wonderful phrase, sort of thrown upon the horns of dilemma. And the dilemma here is whether you're going to allow yourself to become free and break from this material repression into a more spiritual understanding. So this card, again, is symbolizing containment, withholding, if you like, the repression of sexual impulse or material impulse in order to stop the release and the growing into something new. And I'm very aware that there's a lot of Freudian symbolism in that, which you can choose to unpick if you want to. So when you find meaning, you've got to start with your initial reactions. You may not have seen the phallus, or it may be the first thing that leapt out at you. That's not an indication of anything deeply psychologically troubling for you. It's just the fact that that image flies by some people. And I often find it interesting when I use this card, the people that don't see that immediately, and then when I point it out to them, they go, nah, nah. And they think it's me that's weird. Maybe I am. What's your initial reaction to the colors, to the shapes, to the golden rod of creativity? Look at the symbolic references again. The Isis wings on the caduceus, the horns, the little people spinning around in the testes, the chromosomes, and the mindscape. Understand any mystical references. Well, if you follow the occult lessons, we would have already talked a little about sex magic, and again, Crowley was interested in sex magic. In fact, the Order of Thelema has a component about sexual abstinence and sexual indulgence as a magical means for a changed state. So you might want to think about that. You might want to think about the brain's conditioning, the way that we are all conditioned by our past, and that forms neural nets that actually interpret reality. In fact, without getting too caught up on this side of things, our sensory experience of the external world is actually a map made by the internal world. And it's all the limitations, all the things we miss. We tend to notice those things we're interested in, and we tend to ignore those things we're not interested in. We tend to take on board things that confirm our biases and ignore those challenges to our biases. These are all philosophical limitations that belong in the realm of the devil. So have a think about that. And that's about it. Have a read through the material, carry on journaling, carry on reflecting. And by this stage, I'm hoping that your journal contains lots of cross-references and backlinks to things you talked about before, parallels between cards, parallels between imagery in the Waite Coleman Smith deck, the seating of the devil matching the seating of the magician, or the posing of the magician. Is there something in that you can draw out? Ask yourselves, when have you been locked into your unconscious mind, blocking things that would have actually helped you, blocking advice and insights, or even blocking things because you believed something different? Belief is an interesting area to explore when it comes to the devil. Not just about belief in the devil, but actually the way our belief systems already exclude other belief systems and how selective we can be. So have a think about that. Keep journaling, keep making these notes, and keep reviewing the journey. Go back to the Fool and see how the devil relates to the Fool, and the devil relates to the magician. The devil relates to all the cards before it. In fact, that's a great exercise to do. Go back to the 0 card, the Fool, and then look at how the magician relates to the Fool, then how the high priestess relates to the Fool, then how the empress relates to the Fool, and the emperor. Go back and see how they relate to each other. What you'll start to notice are big patterns of interrelationships and interactions. And that's where the power of this oracle system can be found, within the interactions and connections between cards. in and out of sequence. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of this course. So next month, we'll be looking at the Tower. And I love this particular card. And I'll just leave you with the thought that the Tower is what comes about when you deny the change that the previous cards have wanted you to make. Okay, until next time.